At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law leaned in close to my ear. I thought she was going to offer a word of comfort, perhaps share a memory of the man we both loved. Instead, her voice was cold as ice. "Stop crying, old man. You have 3 days to pack your bags and get out of my house." I just smiled, packed a bag, and quietly left. She thought she had won. She thought I was just a broken-down retired contractor with nowhere to go. She had no idea that the next morning, her first visitor would not be a real estate agent, but the police. Before I tell you how I lost everything and fought to get it back, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old man know he is not alone in this fight. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I love reading your stories. My name is Harold Sullivan, but everyone calls me Harry. I am 70 years old, and I have spent my life building things. I built bridges, I built schools, and I built the 2-story craftsman home in the suburbs of Chicago where I raised my only son, Brian. I thought I had built a legacy that would outlast me. But as I stood in the freezing rain at Oakwood Cemetery, watching the mahogany casket lower into the dark earth, I felt like my entire foundation was crumbling. The rain was relentless. It soaked through my old black wool coat, the one I had bought for my wife's funeral 5 years ago. It mixed with the tears on my face, making them cold and stinging. Brian was only 45. He was strong, healthy, the kind of man who could lift a transmission by himself. He owned a small but successful trucking company. He was a safe driver. He checked his brakes. He checked his mirrors. The police report said he lost control on a dry road and hit a tree. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But standing there staring at the wet grass, I didn't have the energy to question it. I just felt a hollow ache in my chest, where my heart used to be. The pastor finished his prayers. He was a young man who didn't know Brian, reciting generic words about peace and a better place. The small crowd began to disperse, rushing toward their cars to escape the weather. I didn't move. I wanted to stay. I wanted to talk to my boy one last time. That was when I felt a presence beside me. I turned, expecting to see a friend, maybe one of Brian's drivers. Instead, I saw Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was not crying. In fact, her makeup was flawless. She wore a black designer dress that fit a little too tightly for a funeral and oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like someone waiting for a bus. Beside her stood Greg. Greg was Brian's best friend, or so he claimed. He was his business partner. He was holding a large black umbrella over Tiffany, shielding her from the rain, while I stood there getting soaked. I looked at Greg. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. His hand was resting on the small of Tiffany's back. It was a gesture that seemed too familiar, too intimate for a man comforting his best friend's widow at the graveside. My gut twisted. I had never liked Greg. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile that belongs to a shark. "Harry," Tiffany said. Her voice cut through the sound of the rain. I looked at her, wiping water from my face. "I am so sorry, Tiff," I started to say. "We will get through this. We have to be strong for Leo." Leo was my 8-year-old grandson. He was sitting in the back of Greg's luxury sedan parked on the asphalt path, staring out the window with a face full of confusion and fear. Tiffany stepped closer. She invaded my personal space, the smell of her expensive perfume overpowering the scent of wet earth and lilies. She lifted her sunglasses and looked me dead in the eye. There was no sadness there, only annoyance. "Enough with the performance, Harry," she hissed. Her voice was low, a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You are embarrassing yourself." I blinked, confused. "Performance, my son is dead." "Tiffany, and he left behind a mountain of debt." She interrupted, her tone sharp. "We are drowning, Harry, and I am not going to let you drag me down with you." I didn't understand. Brian's business was doing well. He had just shown me the quarterly reports a month ago. We went fishing on Lake Michigan, just the two of us, and he told me he was finally feeling secure. He talked about expanding. He didn't talk about debt. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am talking about the house," she said. "I have already contacted a realtor. They are coming to take pictures on Monday morning. You have 3 days, Harry. 3 days to pack your junk and get out." I froze. The cold rain was nothing compared to the chill that ran down my spine. Get out. That is my house, Tiffany. I built that house with these 2 hands. I laid the foundation. I framed the walls. I installed the cabinets. I invited you and Brian to live there when you got married so you could save money. "It is not your house, old man," she sneered. "Not anymore." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. She shoved it against my chest. "Read it and weep," she said. I took the paper with shaking hands. It was a copy of a quitclaim deed, a document transferring ownership of property. I squinted through the rain and my own failing vision. There at the bottom was a signature. Brian Sullivan. It looked like his signature, but something was off. It was shaky, weak. The date next to it was May 12th, 2 days before the accident. "He signed it over to me," Tiffany said, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Sole ownership. It is my property now, and you are just a guest who has overstayed his welcome." I looked at the date again. May 12th. My mind raced. May 12th. That date meant something. I tried to grasp the memory, but the shock was too thick. "Brian would never do this," I whispered. "He would never leave me homeless. He promised me I could stay there until I died." That was the agreement. "Agreements change," Greg chimed in. His voice was smooth, oily. He stepped forward, looming over me. "Brian knew the business was in trouble, Harry. He wanted to make sure Tiffany and Leo were provided for. He did the responsible thing. It is time for you to move on. There is a state-run facility downtown. I hear they have a bed open. A state-run facility. A hospice for the indigent. That was where they wanted to send me. After 40 years of hard work. After raising a son. After building the roof over their heads." I looked from Greg to Tiffany. I saw the look they exchanged. It wasn't grief. It was impatience. They weren't mourning a husband and a friend. They were executing a business transaction, and I was the liability they needed to liquidate. "You are lying," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "I don't know what you did, but my son did not sign this willingly." Tiffany laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound in the quiet cemetery. "Think what you want, Harry. But the deed is filed. It is legal. Monday morning, 8 a.m. If you are not gone, I will call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing. Don't make a scene in front of the neighbors. It is bad for property values." She snatched the paper back from my hand. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, her high heels clicking on the paved path. Greg gave me one last pitying look, a look that said, "You have already lost, old man," before turning to follow her. He placed his hand on her waist again as they walked toward the black sedan. I stood there alone. The rain fell harder. I watched as they got into the car. I saw little Leo's face pressed against the glass in the back seat. He waved at me, a small, sad wave. I tried to wave back, but my arm felt like lead. They drove away, the taillights fading into the gray mist, leaving me with nothing but a fresh grave and a 3-day deadline. I looked down at the mound of dirt covering my son. "I don't believe them, Brian," I said aloud to the wet grass. "I know you didn't do this. I know you didn't leave me behind." I remembered the fishing trip. May 12th. That was the date on the paper. May 12th. A bolt of lightning went through my brain. On May 12th, Brian and I were on a boat in the middle of Lake Michigan from dawn until dusk. There was no cell service. There were no notaries. There were no lawyers. Just me, him, and the fish. How could he have signed a legal document in a notary's office on May 12th when he was sitting next to me on a boat 10 miles offshore? He couldn't. The realization hit me harder than the grief. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a lie. A clumsy, arrogant lie. They thought I was just a senile old carpenter. They thought I wouldn't remember the dates. They thought I would just roll over and die. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The sadness began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning anger. It was the kind of anger I hadn't felt since my days in the Marines. It was a focused, dangerous anger. They wanted me to pack my bags. Fine. I would pack my bags, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed, and I certainly wasn't going to a state home. I touched the cold stone of the grave marker one last time. I am going to fix this son, I whispered. I promise you. I am going to take care of Leo, and I am going to make them pay for every single tear. I turned away from the grave and walked toward my old pickup truck. It was rusted and dented, nothing like Greg's shiny sedan, but the engine still purred. I climbed in the heater, blasting against my frozen hands. I had 72 hours. 72 hours to uncover the truth, save my home, and expose the monsters who had taken over my life. I put the truck in gear. The funeral was over. The war had just begun. I pulled my rusted pickup truck into the driveway of the house I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. The engine sputtered and died, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the gray sky above. This two-story Craftsman was not just wood and brick to me. It was a timeline of my life. I knew every shim in the door frames, every copper pipe in the walls, and exactly which floorboard in the hallway creaked if you stepped on it wrong. I walked up the concrete path I had poured the summer Brian turned 10, my keys already in my hand. I just wanted to get inside, take off these wet funeral clothes, and maybe sit in my armchair until the grief became something I could breathe through. I slid my key into the deadbolt of the solid oak front door. It did not turn. I jiggled it, thinking maybe the cold had seized the tumblers, but then I looked closer. The brass was shiny, too shiny. It was brand new. While I was standing over my son's grave listening to a stranger pray for his soul, they had called a locksmith. They had locked me out of my own life before the dirt on Brian's casket was even dry. A flash of movement caught my eye through the bay window of the living room. I stepped off the porch and peered through the glass, shielding my eyes from the glare. What I saw made my blood boil in my veins. Tiffany was standing in the middle of the room, pointing a manicured finger like a general commanding troops. Greg was there, his suit jacket discarded sleeves rolled up. He was holding one of my flannel shirts, a shirt I had worn for years, and he was stuffing it into a heavy-duty black trash bag like it was hazardous waste. My books, my old military medals, the magazines I kept on the coffee table, they were all being swept into piles on the floor. Then I saw it. On the floor near the fireplace lay a ceramic vase. It was blue with white daisies hand-painted. My wife Martha had made it in a pottery class a year before she died. It was her favorite thing. It was shattered into a dozen pieces, kicked aside to make room for a stack of cardboard boxes. They were erasing us. They were erasing me. And they were erasing the memory of the woman who made this house a home. I did not knock. I did not ring the doorbell. I knew knocking would only give them time to prepare, time to put on their masks. I needed to get in, and I needed to do it now. I walked around to the side of the house, trampling through the azalea bushes that were just starting to bloom. I knelt by the small basement window near the foundation. I remembered installing this window. The latch had a defect, a small misalignment I had meant to fix for years, but never got around to. I pulled a flathead screwdriver from my pocket, a tool I always carried, and wedged it into the frame. With a sharp, practiced twist, the latch popped. I slid the window open and squeezed through, dropping onto the concrete floor of the basement. The smell hit me instantly. sawdust, motor oil, and the faint, earthy scent of the foundation. This was my sanctuary. My workbench was here, my tools, my life's work. I didn't stop to look at them. I marched toward the wooden stairs that led up to the kitchen, my boots heavy on the treads. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, startling Tiffany so badly she dropped her phone. "What the hell?" she shrieked, spinning around. Her face was twisted in a mask of shock and rage. "How did you get in here?" Greg dropped the trash bag he was holding and took a step toward me, his chest puffed out. "You are trespassing, Harry!" Tiffany yelled, her voice shrill and piercing. "Get out. Get out right now, or I am calling the police." I ignored her. I walked straight past her into the living room and bent down to pick up a shard of the blue vase. I held it in my hand, the ceramic cold and sharp against my palm. "You broke her vase," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It is my house," Tiffany spat back, following me. "I can break whatever I want. And look at you breaking into a widow's home. You are insane." I stood up and faced her. "I am not the guest here, Tiffany. I built this floor you are standing on. I paid for this roof, and you changed the locks while I am burying my son." "Brian is gone, Harry," she snapped, her eyes hard and unfeeling. "And he left me with a mess. Do you have any idea how much debt he was in?" She gestured wildly around the room. "The business was failing. He owed creditors, he owed the bank, he owed everyone. This house is the only thing of value left, and I have to sell it to pay off his mistakes. I have to sell it so Leo and I do not end up on the street." I looked at her, searching for a trace of the truth. Brian was meticulous. He was careful with money. He hated debt. "Show me the papers," I demanded. "Show me the ledger." "I do not have to show you anything," she sneered. "You are not on the deed anymore, remember. You are a liability, Harry, a burden. I cannot afford to take care of you and clean up Brian's mess." She walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a glossy brochure. She shoved it into my hand. "Here," she said. "I did you a favor. I made some calls. Pleasant Meadows. It is a state-run facility downtown. They have a bed open in the indigent ward. It is where you belong. You will have 3 meals a day and a nurse to change your sheets. That is more than you deserve after breaking in here." I looked at the brochure. Pleasant Meadows. Everyone in town knew it. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where old people went to stare at the walls until they died. It smelled of urine and despair. This was her plan for me, to rot in a state facility while she sold my home and lived off the proceeds. Suddenly a sound cut through the tension. It was a high, thin wail coming from the second floor. "Leo." My grandson was crying. It was the terrified, heartbroken cry of a child who has lost his father and now feels his world tearing apart. I moved toward the stairs. I needed to see him. I needed to tell him his grandpa was here. "Leo," I called out. "Leo, it is Grandpa!" I made it to the bottom step before a heavy hand slammed into my chest. It was Greg. He was younger than me by 30 years, broader in the shoulders, and he looked at me with a sneer of pure contempt. "Not a good idea, Harry," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The kid is upset. He doesn't need you winding him up." "Get out of my way, Greg," I growled, trying to push past him. He shoved me back hard enough that I stumbled and nearly fell against the banister. "Stay down, old man," he warned. "You do not want to get hurt. You are fragile." I looked up the stairs. I could hear Leo sobbing my name now. "Grandpa, Grandpa." It tore my heart out. I wanted to fight. I wanted to swing at Greg's smug face. But I looked at the two of them. Tiffany with her phone in her hand, thumb hovering over the dial button, ready to call the police. Greg flexing his fists, waiting for an excuse to put me in the hospital. If I fought them now, I would lose. I would be arrested for trespassing and assault. I would be thrown in a cell, and Tiffany would use that to keep me away from Leo forever. She would paint me as a violent, senile old man who had to be put away for his own safety. I would lose the house, the evidence, and my grandson. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the strategist, not the brawler. I needed time. I took a deep breath, forcing my fists to unclench. I let my shoulders slump. I let the look of defeat wash over my face. I looked down at the brochure in my hand as if I was actually considering it. "Fine," I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound broken. "You win." Tiffany lowered her phone, a smug smile spreading across her face. Finally, she said, "Some common sense." "I cannot fight you," I continued, looking at the floor. "I am tired, Tiffany. I just buried my son. I do not have the energy for this." "Good," Greg said, relaxing his stance but not moving from the stairs. "Then get going." I looked up at them, making my eyes plead. "I will go. I will go to the facility. But please, just give me a little dignity. All my things, my tools, my paperwork, everything I have collected over 40 years is in the garage." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "We are throwing that junk out anyway." "Please," I said softly. "Just give me 1 hour. 1 hour to pack my personal items from the garage. I will take what I can carry, and I will leave the key on the bench. You will never see me again." Tiffany looked at Greg. He shrugged. "Let him take his trash," Greg said. "Saves us the trouble of hauling it to the dump." Tiffany sighed, checking her expensive watch. 1 hour, Harry. 60 minutes. If you are not off the property by then the sheriff gets a call, and stay out of the main house. Use the side door." "Thank you," I whispered, playing the part of the beaten man. I turned and walked toward the side door that led to the garage, clutching the broken piece of pottery in my pocket. I kept my head down until I was out of their sight. But as soon as the door closed behind me, I straightened my back. The old man act vanished. My eyes were dry and clear. I had 1 hour. 1 hour to find the truth Brian had hidden. 1 hour to save my life. I wasn't there to pack clothes. I was there to hunt. I stepped into the garage, and the smell of sawdust and old grease hit me like a physical blow. This was my cathedral. The workbench along the far wall was exactly where I had built it 20 years ago, sturdy enough to hold a truck engine. My tools were hanging on the pegboard outlined in marker, so Brian would know where to put them back. I grabbed an old canvas duffel bag from the shelf and started throwing things in. A set of wrenches, a hammer with a worn wooden handle, my grandfather's level. I was not packing for a move. I was packing for a war, though I did not know exactly what weapons I would need yet. Through the small window in the door that connected the garage to the kitchen, I could see them. They had moved into the dining room. Greg was walking around the table, running his hand along the back of the chairs I had upholstered myself. He looked like a king surveying a conquered kingdom. He walked over to the wine rack in the corner, the one Brian had stocked for special occasions. I watched his hand close around the neck of a bottle of 1998 Silver Oak. That was the bottle Brian was saving for his 50th anniversary. He was going to drink it with Tiffany when they were old and gray. Greg popped the cork with a casual, sickening pop and poured the dark red liquid into 2 glasses, filling them to the brim like it was cheap soda. He handed one to Tiffany. She took it, clinked her glass against his, and laughed. That laugh was the final straw. It was the sound of my son being erased. I knew I had to move fast. They were distracted by their celebration. I needed to get to the study. Brian's home office was on the ground floor just down the hall from the kitchen. It was where he handled the books for the trucking company, where he kept the important papers. If there was an answer to why my healthy, careful son drove off a road on a clear day, it was in that room. I left the duffel bag on the workbench, making sure it looked half-packed. I opened the door to the house as quietly as I could, The hinges were well oiled. I made sure of that years ago. I slipped off my heavy work boots, leaving them on the mat so my footsteps would be silent on the hardwood floors. I crept down the hallway, the sounds of their laughter covering the creaking of my knees. The door to the study was ajar. I pushed it open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me until it clicked. The room smelled of Brian. Old paper coffee and a hint of the pine air freshener he used. I scanned the room. It was a disaster. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered on the floor. They had already been here. I went straight to the wall safe behind the large map of Illinois. The painting was already swung out. The safe door was wide open. I peered inside. Empty. Not a single document. Not a single bond. Not even the emergency cash Brian always kept there. Tiffany and Greg had been thorough. They had stripped the carcass clean. Panic started to rise in my throat. If they had the papers, if they had the proof of whatever they were doing, then I was dead in the water. I leaned against the heavy oak desk, trying to think. Brian was smart. He knew Tiffany liked to spend money. He knew she snooped. If he had something he truly wanted to protect, he would not put it in the safe she knew the combination to. Think, Harry, think. Where did he hide things? A memory flashed in my mind. 35 years ago, Brian was 10. He had stolen a pack of baseball cards from the drugstore. I had caught him, of course. I made him return them and apologize, but before I found them, he had hidden them so well I almost missed them. He had pried up a loose piece of parquet flooring in the corner of his bedroom, right under the radiator. He told me later, "Dad, nobody looks under the floor because everyone looks at the walls." I looked at the corner of the study behind the heavy leather armchair. There was a radiator there, just like in his old room. It was a long shot. It was the desperate hope of an old man clinging to a ghost. But it was all I had. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the sharp pain in my joints. I crawled behind the chair. The floor here was original oak laid in a herringbone pattern. I ran my fingers along the seams of the wood, pressing down, feeling for movement. The first three were solid. The fourth one, right against the baseboard, gave slightly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled a small pocket knife from my trousers. I wedged the blade into the thin gap between the slats and leveraged it up. The wood groaned a low protest that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I froze, listening. From the dining room I heard Greg's booming voice. To the future, babe. To Italy. They hadn't heard. I applied more pressure. The slat popped up. I looked into the dark cavity between the joists. It was filled with dust and insulation, but resting on top of the gray fluff was a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy-duty packing tape. I reached in and grabbed it. It felt heavy, solid. I didn't open it. I didn't have time. I shoved the envelope inside my flannel jacket, pressing it flat against my chest. I pushed the wood slat back into place and stomped on it with my sock-clad foot to seat it. Bam! 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 The pounding on the study door made me jump. Harry! It was Tiffany. Her voice was muffled but angry. "What are you doing in there? You are supposed to be in the garage." I scrambled to my feet, smoothing down my jacket. I looked around wildly. I couldn't look like I was snooping. I grabbed a framed photo from the desk. It was a picture of Brian and me at a Cubs game 10 years ago. We were both laughing, holding hot dogs. I opened the door. Tiffany was standing there, her face flushed from wine and irritation. Greg was right behind her, looming in the hallway. "I asked you a question," she snapped. I held up the picture frame, my hands shaking slightly. "I just wanted this," I said, my voice thick with feigned emotion. "I just wanted a picture of my son. Is that okay? Or is that your property too?" Tiffany looked at the photo, then at me. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face, looking for a lie. I slumped my shoulders, letting the exhaustion and grief take over my posture. I tried to look like a beaten dog. "Take it," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Just take it and go, your hour is up." I nodded. I walked past them, clutching the photo to my chest with one hand, the other arm holding the hidden envelope tight against my ribs. I went back to the garage, shoved the photo into the duffel bag, and zipped it up. I put my boots back on my fingers, fumbling with the laces. I walked out the side door of the garage, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cold. I walked down the driveway toward my truck. I stopped at the edge of the property. I couldn't leave without doing one thing. I turned and looked up at the second-floor window. Leo's room. The curtains were drawn, but a small hand had pulled one side back. I saw his face, pale, tear-streaked, pressed against the glass. He was watching me leave. He looked so small, so alone. I raised my hand and placed it over my heart. I tapped my chest twice. It was our secret signal. It meant I love you and I am here. He didn't move. He just watched. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Greg standing on the front porch, arm around Tiffany, watching me go. They thought they had won. They thought they had cleared the board. I touched the envelope inside my jacket. It was warm against my skin. "You have no idea what you just started," I whispered to the reflection in the mirror. I drove toward the highway, leaving my home behind. But I wasn't driving away. I was driving toward the truth, and God help anyone who stood in my way. I pulled into the parking lot of the Motel 6 off the interstate just as the sun began to set behind a wall of gray clouds. The neon sign out front was buzzing with a dying flicker, casting a sickly yellow light over the cracked asphalt. I paid for the room with cash, $49 a night, plus tax. The clerk, a young kid with headphones around his neck, didn't even look up from his phone as he slid the key card across the counter. He didn't care who I was. To him, I was just another old man checking into a cheap room on a Friday night, probably passing through to nowhere. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, a scent that sticks to your clothes and never really leaves. The carpet was a shade of brown that was designed to hide stains, and the bedspread looked like it had been there since the Reagan administration. I locked the door behind me, engaging the deadbolt and the chain. I closed the curtains tight, shutting out the world. I placed the canvas duffel bag on the bed and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had pried from the floorboards of my son's study. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from a mixture of adrenaline and dread. Tiffany had told me Brian died drowning in debt. She said the business was under, that the house was the only asset left to save her and Leo from ruin. I sat down at the small, wobbly round table near the window and turned on the single lamp. The light was dim, casting long dancing shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I reached for my pocket knife and slit the heavy-duty packing tape sealing the envelope. I took a breath, holding it in my chest like I used to do before diving underwater to fix a pier piling. I reached in and pulled out the stack of papers. I expected to see red ink. I expected foreclosure notices, final demands from banks, credit card statements with astronomical balances. I expected to see the proof of my son's failure, the evidence that justified Tiffany throwing me out into the rain. But the first document on top wasn't a bill. It was a policy declaration from a major life insurance company. I put on my reading glasses, the ones I had bought at the drugstore, because I was too stubborn to go to the optometrist. I scanned the page. Policy number 45922, insured Brian Sullivan. Effective date April 24th. My breath hitched. April 24th. That was 3 weeks before the crash. That was less than a month ago. I let my eyes drift down to the coverage amount. I expected maybe $100,000, enough to cover funeral costs and maybe pay off a truck. $2,500,000. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking the dim light was playing tricks on me. I looked again. There were 6 zeros. $2.5 million. My son wasn't broke. He hadn't died leaving his family in the gutter. He had secured a fortune just weeks before his death. But why did Tiffany say he was in debt? Why the urgency to sell the house for cash? I turned the page to the beneficiary designation. This was the section that usually listed the spouse. In a standard policy, it would say Tiffany Sullivan 100%. It didn't. Primary beneficiary, the Sullivan Family Trust. Trustee Harold Sullivan. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling out of the chair. The Sullivan Family Trust. I remembered Brian mentioning a trust years ago when Leo was born, something to set aside money for college, but I thought it was just a savings account. I didn't know he had reactivated it. I didn't know he had made me the trustee. This meant Tiffany couldn't touch a dime of this money. Not directly. The insurance payout wouldn't go to her personal account to fund her trips to Italy or buy Greg's expensive suits. It would go into a trust managed by me, specifically for the care and education of Leo. If Tiffany knew about this, she would be furious. But looking at her actions over the last 3 days, the way she claimed poverty, the way she was rushing to sell the house, I realized something terrifying. She didn't know. Or maybe she suspected, but she hadn't seen the paperwork. I dug deeper into the envelope. Behind the insurance policy, there were printed emails. They were correspondences between Brian and a lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. I knew Sarah. I had fixed the roof of her office building 2 years ago in exchange for her reviewing some contracts for Brian. She was a good kid, sharp as a tack. I started reading the emails, and with every line, the image of my son's happy marriage disintegrated like ash in the wind. Email dated May 1st, subject divestment and protection. Sarah Bryan wrote, "I found the transfers. You were right. Tiffany has been siphoning money from the company accounts into a shell corporation registered in the Caymans. She thinks I don't check the vendor list, but I saw the invoices for consulting services that never happened. It is over $200,000 in the last 6 months alone." I felt a wave of nausea. Tiffany wasn't just spending money. She was stealing it. She was embezzling from her own husband's company. I read the next email dated May 10th, 4 days before he died. "Sarah, it is worse than I thought. I checked the phone records. She and Greg aren't just talking business. There are hundreds of calls late at night. I found a hotel receipt in the glove box of his car when we swapped vehicles for a job. They are planning something. I heard her on the phone yesterday talking about liquidating assets. I need to secure everything for Leo. I signed the new insurance policy today, and I named Dad as the trustee. Do not tell Tiffany. If she knows I cut her out, she will burn the house down. I am going to confront her after the weekend fishing trip with Dad. I want one last peaceful weekend before the storm hits." My hand shook so violently, the paper rattled. Brian knew. He knew everything. He knew his wife was a thief. He knew his best friend was a snake. He was planning to divorce her. He was planning to protect Leo and me. And he was going to confront her after our fishing trip. The fishing trip was on May 12th, the day she claimed he signed the house over to her. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Tiffany didn't kick me out because she hated me. She didn't kick me out because the house was too small. She kicked me out because she needed to control the narrative. She lied about the debt to justify selling the house immediately. She needed cash fast. If she sold the house before the insurance company processed the claim, she would have liquid assets to run with. But there was a bigger reason she needed me gone. The mail. The insurance company would send the notification of death benefits to the trustee. To me. At my address. If I was sitting in my living room when that letter arrived, I would know everything. I would know about the $2.5 million. I would know I controlled it. And I would stop her. She needed to intercept that letter. She needed to be the one to open the mailbox. She needed me in a state facility or on the street, unreachable and discredited, so she could forge my signature on the insurance claim, just like she forged Brian's signature on the house deed. She wasn't just a grieving widow making hard choices. She was a predator. She was trying to steal my son's legacy, my grandson's future, and vanish before anyone realized the money wasn't hers. I looked at the date on the last email again. May 10th. He was going to confront her after the weekend. He never got the chance. He died on Tuesday, May 14th. The accident. The lost control on a dry road. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Brian was meticulous. He checked his trucks every morning. He wouldn't just lose control. Not Brian. I thought about Greg. Greg, who was a mechanic before he put on a suit and pretended to be a businessman. Greg, who had access to Brian's trucks. Greg, who was sleeping with my son's wife and planning a life in Italy with stolen money. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just embezzlement. I looked at the papers spread out on the cheap motel table. This was a motive for murder. They killed him. The thought whispered in my mind, then screamed. They killed my son for the money, and they didn't know he had changed the beneficiary. They killed him thinking they would get everything, and now they were scrambling because the walls were closing in. I stood up and paced the small room. My anger was no longer a burning fire. It was a cold, hard block of ice in my gut. They thought I was a senile old man. They thought I was a nuisance to be discarded. They had no idea. I went to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face lined with 70 years of sun and wind. But the man looking back at me wasn't defeated. He was a father. He was a Marine. And he was the trustee of a multi-million-dollar estate. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them take the house. I wasn't going to let them take the money. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them get away with what they did to Brian. I walked back to the table and gathered the papers. I put them back in the envelope and slid it under the mattress. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my flip phone. It was old, but it worked. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but I knew it by heart. Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law. It was late past midnight. But I knew Sarah. She worked late. The phone rang 3 times. Hello, a tired female voice answered. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and low. This is Harry Sullivan, Brian's dad. Harry, she said, her voice instantly waking up. Oh my God, Harry. I heard about the accident. I am so sorry. I tried to call the house, but the number was disconnected. Yeah, I said. I am not at the house. I need your help, Sarah. And I need you to listen very carefully, because what I am about to tell you is going to sound crazy. But I have the papers to prove it. I told her I had the emails. I told her about the insurance policy. I told her about the eviction. When can you meet me? She asked, her lawyer instincts taking over. First thing in the morning, I said. But Sarah, before we meet, I need you to check something for me. I need you to check the county records for a quitclaim deed filed on May 12th for my address. I will do it right now, she said. I hung up the phone. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I was going to plan. They gave me 3 days to leave. I had used 1 day to find the truth. I had 2 days left. 2 days to turn their trap back on them. Tiffany wanted a war. She wanted me to disappear. Well, I was going to disappear, all right. I was going to become her worst nightmare. I was going to be the ghost that haunted her until justice was served. I closed my eyes and saw Brian's face. I got you, son, I whispered into the darkness. I got you. The coffee from the motel lobby tasted like battery acid, but it did the job. It kept my eyes open as I drove downtown to the brick building where Sarah Jenkins had her law practice. The sun was just starting to burn through the morning fog, casting long shadows across the city streets. I parked the truck 2 blocks away to avoid paying for the garage, clutching the manila envelope against my chest like a shield. Sarah's office was on the second floor above a dry cleaner. I walked up the stairs, the smell of steam and chemicals following me. When I opened the door, Sarah was already there, sitting behind a desk, buried under stacks of files. She looked up, her eyes widening when she saw me. I probably looked like hell. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn for 3 days, my face was unshaven, and my eyes felt like they were filled with sand. "Harry," she said, standing up and coming around the desk to hug me. I held myself, stiffly afraid that if I relaxed into the hug, I might collapse. "I have the coffee brewing," she said, pulling back and looking at my face. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a heavyweight." "I feel like it too," I admitted, sitting down in the client chair. The leather was cracked and worn just like me. I placed the envelope on her desk. "That is everything," I said. "The insurance policy, the emails, everything Brian left for me." Sarah put on her glasses and opened the file. She didn't speak for a long time. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the rustling of paper. I watched her face. I saw her eyebrows knit together as she read Brian's emails about the embezzlement. I saw her eyes widen when she saw the insurance amount. "This is substantial, Harry," she said, finally looking up. $2.5 million. And you are the sole trustee. Tiffany has no legal claim to this money. None. "I know," I said. "But she thinks she does. Or she thinks she can get it if she sells the house fast enough and leaves town. That is why she kicked me out. She needs me gone so she can intercept the mail." Sarah nodded slowly. "It fits. It all fits. But we need to stop the sale of the house. You said she showed you a quitclaim deed." "Yes," I said. "She had a copy. She said Brian signed it on May 12th. Sarah turned to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Let me pull up the county recorder's database," she said. "If she filed it, it will be scanned in the system." I waited, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Here it is," Sarah said. Her voice was flat. "Recorded yesterday morning. Quitclaim deed. Grantor Brian Sullivan. Grantee Tiffany Sullivan." She turned the monitor so I could see. There it was. A digital image of the document that had stolen my home. I leaned in, squinting at the bottom of the page. There was Brian's signature. It was loopy and a bit jagged, but it looked like his hand. "It looks real," Sarah said softly. "If I didn't know better, I would say he signed it." I looked at the date next to the signature. May 12th. "May 12th, I repeated. "Sarah, look at the date." "I see it," she said. 3 days before he died." "No," I said, my voice rising. "You do not understand. On May 12th, Brian wasn't in any office. He wasn't with a notary. He wasn't with Tiffany." I closed my eyes, letting the memory of that day wash over me. It was the last good day. The last day my son was alive and happy. On May 12th, I said, opening my eyes, Brian and I were 10 miles off the coast of Lake Michigan. We took his boat out at 4 in the morning. We didn't come back to the dock until after sunset. Sarah stared at me. "Are you sure?" "I am positive," I said. It was the only day off he had taken in months. He left his phone in the truck because he said he didn't want Tiffany calling him every 5 minutes. "We were out there all day, Sarah. Just the two of us. There is no cell service 10 miles out. There are no notaries on a fishing boat." I pointed at the screen. "He could not have signed that document on May 12th. It is physically impossible. He was with me." Sarah looked back at the screen, her lawyer brain working furiously. "If he was with you," she said, "then this signature is a forgery. And a damn good one. But look here." She pointed to the line below Brian's signature. "The witness line. Witnessed by Gregory P. Vance," she read. Greg, I spat the name out. Of course. Greg is the witness, Sarah said. And look at the notary stamp. It belongs to a notary in a strip mall 3 towns over. I bet if we dig, we will find a connection between Greg and that notary. So we have them, I said, feeling a surge of hope. We can prove it is fake. Sarah leaned back in her chair, taking off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. It is not that simple, Harry. We know it is fake. You know where he was, but in a court of law, it is your word against a notarized legal document. What do you mean, I asked. I am his father. I was with him. And Tiffany will argue that you are a grieving, confused old man, Sarah said gently. She will say you got the dates wrong. She will say Brian signed it in the morning before he met you, or late at night after he got back. Without hard evidence like a GPS log from the boat or a time-stamped photo of him on the water, it is an uphill battle. I slammed my hand on the desk. So they just get away with it. They steal my house, they kill my son, and I can't do anything because of a stamp. No, Sarah said firmly. We can fight this. We can hire a forensic document examiner. They can analyze the ink, the pressure of the pen. If we can get the original document, we can prove the ink isn't from May 12th. Or we can prove the signature was traced. But that takes time, Harry. Weeks. Maybe months. I don't have months, I said. I have 2 days. She is selling the house on Monday. If she sells it to an innocent buyer, getting it back will be a nightmare. And once she has the cash, she is gone. She is going to Italy, she told Greg. Sarah sat forward. Then we file an emergency injunction, she said. We go to a judge today. We show the insurance policy, the emails, your affidavit about the fishing trip. We can get a temporary restraining order to stop the sale. I thought about it. An injunction. A court order. It was the civilized way. It was the legal way. But then I thought about Greg. I thought about the cut brake line. I thought about the gun I knew he kept in his glove box. If we file an injunction, I said slowly, Tiffany will know. She will know I have the insurance papers. She will know I am onto them. Yes, Sarah said. But it stops the sale. And it warns the rats, I said. If they know I am coming for them legally, they will destroy everything else. They will burn the other evidence. They will take the money they have already stolen and disappear. They might even hurt Leo to leverage me. I looked at the picture of the quitclaim deed on the screen. It was a weapon. They had used the law as a weapon against me. I cannot tip my hand, Sarah, I said. I cannot let them know I have the power. I need them to think I am defeated. I need them to think they have won. Harry, what are you thinking? Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. I need them to confess, I said. I need them to say it out loud. I need undeniable proof that they forged this deed and that they killed Brian. That is dangerous, Sarah warned. These people are desperate. If they killed Brian, they won't hesitate to hurt you. I am not afraid of them, I said, and for the first time in days I meant it. I am 70 years old. I have lived my life. My son is dead. I have nothing left to lose except my grandson. I stood up. Don't file the injunction, Sarah. Not yet. Harry, you are taking a huge risk, she said. If the house sells, let it sell, I interrupted. Or let them think it is selling. I am going back there. Back to the house, she asked. Yes, I said. Tonight is Saturday. The deadline is Monday morning. They will be celebrating. They will be careless. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my flip phone. I am going to get the proof, Sarah. I am going to get them on tape. And when I do, I will send it to you. You be ready to call the cavalry. Sarah looked at me. She saw the set of my jaw, the look in my eyes. She knew she couldn't stop me. She nodded. Be careful, Harry, she said softly. Please. I picked up the manila envelope. I am not leaving this here, I said. It is too dangerous. I walked to the door. Harry. Sarah called out. I turned. Make them pay, she said. I nodded. I intend to. I walked out of the office and down the stairs. The morning sun was fully up now, but the world still felt dark. I had a plan. It was a crazy, dangerous plan. I was going back into the lion's den. I was going back to the house that was no longer mine to face the people who had taken everything from me. But this time I wasn't going as a victim. I was going as a ghost. I was going to haunt them until they screamed the truth. I climbed into my truck. I needed supplies. I needed wire cutters. I needed recording equipment. I needed to become the mechanic again, the man who understood how to fix broken things. And my family was broken. I drove toward the hardware store. The clock was ticking. 48 hours left. And every second counted. I drove to the municipal impound lot on the edge of town where the city stored the wreckage of lives interrupted by bad luck and bad decisions. The chain-link fence was topped with razor wire that glinted in the afternoon sun, guarding rows of twisted metal and shattered glass. I knew the man who ran the gate. His name was Frank, a retired cop I had built a deck for 10 years ago. We had stayed in touch over cheap coffee and complaints about our aching backs. I parked my truck outside the gate and walked up to the booth. Frank looked up from his newspaper, his face settling into a mask of sympathy when he recognized me. "Harry," he said, opening the door. "I heard about Brian. I am so sorry. It is a damn tragedy." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks, Frank. Listen, I need a favor. I need to see the truck." Frank hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, Harry. It is part of an open investigation, technically. And honestly, you don't want to see it." "It is bad. I need to see it, Frank," I said, my voice hard. "I need to make peace with it. I need to know what happened. Please. Just 5 minutes." He looked at my eyes, saw the desperation there, and sighed. He grabbed a clipboard and buzzed the gate open. "Row 4 near the back," he said. "Don't touch anything you aren't supposed to. And Harry, take your time." I walked through the rows of mangled cars. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber hung heavy in the air. It was a graveyard of machines. I found row 4 and walked until I saw it. Brian's truck. It was a Ford F-150 black, the one he polished every Sunday. Now it was a crushed tin can. The front end was accordion-ed into the cab, the windshield shattered into 1,000 diamonds. The driver's side door had been cut off by the fire department to get him out. There were dark stains on the upholstery that I tried not to look at. My knees buckled, and I had to grab the side of the bed to stay upright. That was where my boy died. That was where his heart stopped beating. I stood there for a moment, letting the grief wash over me, but then I pushed it down. I locked it away in a steel box in my mind. I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to work. I was a mechanic before I was a contractor. I knew engines. I knew systems. And I knew that Brian maintained this truck better than he maintained his own health. A sudden loss of control on a straight, dry road didn't just happen. I looked around to make sure Frank wasn't watching. He was back in his booth. I dropped to the gravel, ignoring the sharp stones digging into my knees and the cold dampness seeping into my jeans. I slid underneath the truck into the dark, oily space beneath the chassis. It was a mess down there. The impact had twisted, the frame snapped the drive shaft. But I wasn't looking at the structural damage. I was looking for the brake lines. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the undercarriage. I traced the hydraulic lines running from the master cylinder to the rear wheels. They were steel tubes, tough and durable. I found the rupture near the rear axle. Fluid had sprayed everywhere, coating the underbelly in a slick black grime. But when I wiped the line clean with my thumb, my heart stopped. If a brake line bursts from pressure or impact, it jagged. It tears. The metal stretches before it snaps, leaving rough, uneven edges. This wasn't jagged. I brought the light closer, squinting through my reading glasses. The cut was clean. It was precise. The metal was slightly pinched, pipe pinches when you use a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters or tin snips. It wasn't a complete cut. Whoever did it had snipped it halfway through, leaving just enough metal to hold for a few miles, maybe a day, until the pressure of a hard stop caused the line to blow out completely. It was a time bomb. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the damp ground. This was not an accident. This was murder. Someone had crawled under this truck just like I was doing now and deliberately sabotaged the brakes. They knew Brian would be driving. They knew he would need to stop, and they knew he would die. I moved the light around, scanning the area near the cut. That was when I saw it. Caught on a jagged piece of the suspension arm just inches from the severed line was a tiny scrap of fabric. It was blue, a dark navy blue. It was stiff like canvas. I reached out with trembling fingers and carefully worked it loose. I held it up to the light. It was greasy and frayed, but I recognized the material. It was from a work uniform, the kind mechanics or construction workers wear. I stared at that scrap of cloth, and a memory slammed into me. Greg. Greg wasn't always a smooth-talking businessman in a tailored suit. 20 years ago, when Brian first met him, Greg was a mechanic at a local garage. He was the one who taught Brian how to change his own oil. He knew cars. He knew exactly where to cut a brake line to make it look like a failure. He knew how to kill a truck without anyone noticing until it was too late. And I remembered something else. Last week, when I stopped by Brian's office to drop off some paperwork, I saw Greg leaving. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing a navy blue coverall, the kind he used to wear in the shop. He told me he was helping Brian check the fleet in the yard. He had laughed, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Just keeping my skills sharp, Harry," he had said. Keeping his skills sharp. He had been practicing. Or maybe he had been doing the job right then. I clenched the piece of fabric in my fist so hard my knuckles turned white. Greg did this. He crawled under my son's truck with a pair of snips and murdered his best friend. And Tiffany knew. She had to know. The phone calls, the insurance policy, the rush to sell the house. It was all part of the same bloody plan. They didn't just want the money. They wanted Brian gone. They wanted him erased so they could live their fantasy life in Italy on his grave. I crawled out from under the truck, my body shaking, with a rage so intense it made my vision blur. I stood up and brushed the gravel from my clothes, but I couldn't brush off the feeling of death. I looked at the twisted metal of the cab one last time. "I know what happened, son," I whispered. "I know who did this to you." I put the piece of blue fabric into the small plastic bag where I kept my heart medication and shoved it deep into my pocket. This was evidence. It might not be enough to convict them yet, but it was enough for me. It was the confirmation I needed to take the gloves off. I walked back to the gate. Frank came out of the booth. "You okay, Harry?" he asked, looking at my pale face and the grease on my jacket. "No, Frank," I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "I am not okay. But I have seen enough." I walked to my truck. I didn't just have a plan anymore. I had a mission. I wasn't just fighting for a house or a bank account. I was fighting a homicide. I drove away from the impound lot. The image of that clean cut in the brake line burned into my retinas. Greg was a mechanic. He thought he was smart. He thought he knew how machines worked, but he forgot one thing. I was a mechanic too, and I knew how to take things apart. I was going to take apart his life piece by piece until there was nothing left but the truth. I checked the time. Saturday afternoon. They would be at the house. They would be comfortable. They would be careless. It was time to go home. It was time to set the trap. I parked my truck 3 blocks away, tucked behind a line of overgrown hedges that bordered the community park. It was a Saturday night, and the neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy before a storm. I sat in the darkness of the cab watching the digital clock on the dashboard tick past 8, then 9. I knew their schedule. I knew they would be celebrating. Tiffany had practically broadcast it when she told me the buyers were coming on Monday. They were going out to toast their victory, to drink expensive champagne paid for with my son's blood money. Sure enough, at 9:30 the garage door opened. Greg's sleek black sedan backed out, the taillights cutting red streaks into the night. I watched through my binoculars as Tiffany got into the passenger seat. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress, laughing at something Greg said. They looked like a couple going to prom, not two people who had just buried a husband and a friend. As they drove away, leaving my house dark and silent, I felt a surge of cold determination. They were going out to celebrate their new life. I was going in to ensure they never got to live it. I waited 10 minutes to be sure they weren't coming back for a forgotten phone or wallet. Then I moved. I didn't walk down the sidewalk like a visitor. I moved through the backyards, stepping over low fences and skirting around motion sensor lights. I knew every yard in this neighborhood because I had helped build half of these fences. I reached the perimeter of my own property, the place I had called home for 3 decades. It felt alien, now hostile territory occupied by enemy forces. I approached the utility box on the side of the garage. This was the nerve center for the security system I had installed myself 2 years ago. Brian had wanted it for peace of mind. I opened the panel using a thin shim to bypass the lock. The wiring was complex, a spiderweb of red and black, but I didn't need a diagram. I traced the feed for the external cameras. I didn't want to cut the power to the whole house. That would reset the clocks and alert them that the power had gone out. I just needed to blind the eyes watching the yard. I used my wire cutters to snip the coaxial cables for the 4 perimeter cameras, then quickly stripped and twisted a small loop of wire across the terminals to trick the system into thinking the circuit was still closed. No alarm would sound. The monitors inside would just show static or a frozen image, and they were too drunk on arrogance to check the feeds tonight. I left the internal cameras live. I needed them. I needed to see what they did when they thought they were alone. Now came the hard part. I couldn't go in through a door or window. Even with the cameras down the door, sensors were active, and I didn't have the code to bypass the silent alarm that dialed the police. I had to go in a way they wouldn't expect. I had to go in through the roof. I went to the back of the house where the trellis rose to the second-story eaves. I had built that trellis for Martha's climbing roses. Now it was my ladder. I tested my weight on the first rung. The wood groaned but held. I began to climb. My 70-year-old joints screamed in protest. My bad knee, the one I blew out on a job site in '98, throbbed with every step. But I grit my teeth and pulled myself up hand over hand, smelling the faint scent of dried roses and rain. I reached the roofline and hauled myself over the gutter, rolling onto the asphalt shingles. I lay there for a moment, breathing hard, looking up at the stars. I was an old man breaking into his own house like a cat burglar. If it weren't so tragic, it would be funny. I crawled across the rough surface of the roof to the chimney. Next to it was a mushroom-shaped vent for the attic fan. I pulled a cordless drill from the bag slung across my back. I removed the screws securing the vent cover, working by touch in the dark. I lifted the metal cap and set it aside. The hole was tight, barely 18 inches wide, but I had stayed lean. I lowered my legs into the black void of the attic, feeling for the rafters with my feet. I found a beam and dropped down, pulling the bag in after me. The attic was stifling, smelling of fiberglass insulation and dry dust. It was pitch black. I clicked on a small penlight, holding it in my teeth. I had to move carefully. One wrong step and my foot would punch through the drywall ceiling below, alerting the whole neighborhood. I walked along the joists, balancing like a tightrope walker, moving toward the center of the house. I stopped directly over the living room. I scraped away the loose insulation, exposing the top side of the plasterboard ceiling. I opened my bag and took out a long, thin drill bit. I positioned it carefully, estimating where the large crystal chandelier hung in the room below. I drilled slowly, applying barely any pressure, letting the bit eat through the plaster without cracking it. When the bit punched through, I stopped immediately. I pulled a fiber optic wire from my kit. It was a high-end surveillance microphone, something I had picked up at the spy shop downtown with cash. I fed the tiny wire through the hole until the mic head was just flush with the ceiling below, hidden in the shadows of the chandelier's ornate brass base. I secured the battery pack and transmitter to the rafter with duct tape. I turned it on and saw the tiny red LED blink once. It was live. Next, I moved to the area above the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room where I had slept next to my wife for 40 years. Now Tiffany and Greg were sleeping there. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I navigated the rafters until I was over the center of the room. I knew there was a smoke detector mounted on the ceiling there. I had changed the battery myself 6 months ago. I carefully cut a small square in the drywall, right next to the electrical box for the detector. I reached down through the hole, unscrewing the detector from above. I pulled it up into the attic. I replaced it with a duplicate I had prepared in the motel room, a smoke detector that looked identical but housed a wide-angle camera lens and a high-gain microphone. I wired it into the house's power supply so it would never run out of battery. I pushed it back down into the hole and screwed it into the mounting bracket from above, sealing the edges with a bit of putty to hide the seams. I checked the receiver on my phone. The image flickered to life. I saw my bed. I saw the dresser where Martha's jewelry box used to sit. The room was empty, the bed unmade. It was a violation to look, but they had violated my home first. I was just taking it back. I checked my watch. 1:45 in the morning. They would be back soon. The bars closed at 2. I needed to get out. I retraced my steps to the vent opening. Climbing out was harder than getting in. I had to hoist my body weight straight up through the hole. My arms shook. My shoulders burned. I scrabbled for purchase on the roof shingles, kicking my legs until I flopped out onto the cool night air like a landed fish. I replaced the vent cover, screwing it down tight. I slid down the roof to the trellis and climbed down my boots, slipping on the dew-slicked wood. I hit the ground and froze. Headlights swept across the trees at the end of the block. A car was turning onto the street. I pressed myself into the shadows of the azalea bushes, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The car moved slowly, prowling down the street. It was the black sedan. Greg. I was trapped in the backyard. If I ran to the street now, they would see me in the headlights. If I stayed and they came into the backyard for a smoke, I was caught. Well, I waited until the car turned into the driveway. The garage door rumbled open. As soon as the sedan pulled inside and the door began to close, I bolted. I sprinted across the neighbor's lawn, vaulting the low chain-link fence with an agility I didn't know I still possessed. I cut through the park, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my chest burning. I reached my truck just as the garage door fully closed down the street. I threw my bag onto the passenger seat and climbed in, locking the doors. I sat there for a moment, head resting on the steering wheel, trying to calm the tremors in my hands. I had done it. I was in. I drove the truck 1 block over, parking it on a side street where I had a clear line of sight to the receiver's signal, but remained hidden from the house. I killed the engine and reclined the seat. I put on the heavy noise-canceling headphones connected to the receiver. I adjusted the volume. At first there was only the low hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the house. Then I heard the front door open. "You are drunk," Tiffany's voice came through clear and crisp, as if she were sitting next to me. "I am celebrating," Greg's voice boomed. He sounded slurred, heavy. "We did it, baby. We actually did it." I closed my eyes, visualizing them in my living room. "Is the old man gone?" Greg asked. I heard the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood. "His junk is gone from the garage," Tiffany said. "He cleared out. Probably crying in a shelter somewhere." "Good riddance," Greg laughed. A cruel, wet sound. I sat in the dark cab of my truck, the smell of old coffee and grease comforting me. I adjusted the frequency, sharpening the audio. "Keep talking," I whispered to the empty street. "Keep talking, you sons of bitches. Tell me everything." I wasn't an old man crying in a shelter. I was the shadow in their ceiling. I was the eye in their bedroom. And the night was just beginning. The headphones felt heavy on my ears, sealing me into a world of static and shadows. I sat in the cab of my truck parked in the darkness of a side street, while the digital recorder on the seat beside me spun silently. A tiny red light blinked in the gloom. It was the only star in my sky tonight. Through the high-gain microphone I had planted in the ceiling of my living room, the sounds of my own house came flooding back to me, distorted but unmistakably clear. I heard the heavy thud of a bottle being set down on the coffee table. Then came the sharp, crystalline ring of a toast. To us, Greg's voice boomed. It was loud, slurred by alcohol and arrogance. To the master plan. "To us," Tiffany replied. Her voice was lighter, giddy with the thrill of what they thought was a perfect victory. I closed my eyes, visualizing them. They were sitting on the leather sofa I had bought for Brian when he landed his first big contract. They were drinking his wine. They were celebrating his death in the home he had paid for. "I wonder where the old man is right now," Greg said, followed by a wet, ugly laugh. "Probably sleeping under a bridge down by the river. Or maybe he found a cardboard box behind the grocery store." "Stop it," Tiffany giggled, though she didn't sound like she wanted him to stop. "You are terrible. He is probably at that motel off the highway. The one where the junkies go. It is all he can afford with what is in his wallet." "He won't be affording that for long," Greg said. "Once we close on Monday, the locks get changed again and the new owners take over. He can come back and cry to the for sale sign. By then, we will be ghost." I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles popped. They were talking about me like I was a stray dog they had successfully kicked to the curb. But I forced myself to breathe. I needed them to keep talking. I needed the details. "So the buyer is confirmed?" Greg asked. "Cash deal." 100%, Tiffany said. "The wire transfer hits the escrow account at noon on Monday. As soon as it clears, I am transferring our cut to the account in the Cayman Islands. The LLC is already set up." Blue Horizon Ventures. Sounds legitimate, doesn't it? "It sounds like freedom, babe," Greg said. 2.5 million from the insurance plus the equity from the house. We are looking at nearly $4 million. We are going to be kings in Italy." I froze. They mentioned the insurance. They were banking on it. They didn't know. They still didn't know I was the trustee. They thought the money was coming to her. But then the conversation shifted, and the temperature in my truck seemed to drop 20 degrees. Tiffany's voice dropped. She sounded anxious, the giddiness evaporating. "I am still worried." "About what?" Greg asked, his voice thick with dismissal. "We won." "About the truck," she said. "About the accident." "The police report said loss of control, but what if they look closer? What if the insurance investigators get involved? You know how they are with big policies. What if they check the brakes?" I held my breath. The silence on the tape stretched for a terrifying second. This was it. This was the moment. "Babe, relax," Greg said. His voice was smooth, confident, the voice of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. I handled it. "But how can you be sure?" she pressed. "Brian was obsessed with maintenance. If the brakes just failed, people would ask questions." "That is why they didn't just fail," Greg said. I helped them along. I pressed the headphones harder against my ears, terrified I might miss a single syllable. "I used the bolt cutters from the shop," Greg continued, bragging now. "I didn't cut the line all the way through. That would have been obvious. The fluid would have leaked out in the driveway, and he would have noticed before he even backed out." "Then what did you do?" Tiffany asked. I crimped it, Greg explained. I pinched the metal right at the stress point near the rear axle. I weakened the structural integrity of the steel tube. It held fine for normal driving. But I knew his route. I knew he took the steep grade down Miller's Hill on his way to the warehouse. My stomach churned. Miller's Hill. It was a mile-long descent. You had to ride the brakes the whole way down. When he hit that hill with a full load, Greg said the pressure in the lines spiked. The weakened metal couldn't take it. It ruptured. Snap. No brakes. At 50 miles an hour with a full payload, he didn't stand a chance. "Oh God," Tiffany whispered. It wasn't horror in her voice. It was awe. "You really thought of everything." And the best part, Greg added, sounding incredibly pleased with himself. When the truck hit the tree, the impact crumpled the rear chassis. The axle folded right over the spot where I made the crimp. It is buried inside a twisted knot of steel. No beat cop is going to see it. A standard insurance adjuster won't even look, unless some expert mechanic crawls under there with a magnifying glass and knows exactly what he is looking for. It just looks like crash damage. It is the perfect crime, Tiff. I let out a shuddering breath that fogged the cold window of the truck. He had confessed. He had laid it all out. He admitted to premeditated murder. He admitted to using his knowledge of mechanics to turn my son's truck into a death trap. And he admitted he thought he was safe because he thought no one was smart enough to look. He was wrong. An expert mechanic had looked. And that mechanic was sitting 3 blocks away, recording every word. But they weren't done. "What about Leo?" Greg asked. "The boy. He is going to be a problem in Italy. He speaks English. He asks questions. He misses his daddy." I felt a fresh wave of rage. Leo. My innocent grandson. "I have that handled too," Tiffany said. Her voice was cold, devoid of any maternal instinct. "I found a boarding school, a military academy in upstate New York. It is cheap, strict, and they take boys as young as 8. Military school." Greg laughed. "For an 8-year-old. That is harsh." "He needs discipline," Tiffany said defensively. "He is too much like Brian, too soft. Besides, it is a year-round program. We drop him off on Sunday, tell him it is what his father wanted, and then we head to the airport. By the time he realizes we aren't coming back for Parents' Weekend, we will be sipping wine on the Amalfi Coast. I will send a check for his tuition once a year. That is more than enough parenting." My hand clamped down on the steering wheel. I squeezed. I squeezed until I felt the leather groaning under my grip. I squeezed until a sharp, tearing pain shot through my palm. I looked down. My fingernails had dug into the flesh of my hand, breaking the skin. A drop of dark blood welled up and ran down my wrist. They were going to abandon him. They were going to throw my grandson away like a piece of unwanted luggage so they could enjoy their blood money. "We are free," Greg said. "We are rich and we are free. To us." "To us," Tiffany echoed. I reached over and stopped the recording. I saved the file. Then I backed it up to the cloud. Then I emailed a copy to Sarah. I took the headphones off. The silence in the truck was deafening. My hand was throbbing, the blood sticky on my skin. I didn't wipe it off. I wanted to feel it. I wanted the pain. It focused me. I looked through the windshield at the dark street. They were celebrating in my house. They were drinking my son's wine. They were planning to discard my grandson. They thought they were gods. They thought they were untouchable. I looked at the blood on my hand. "You are not gods," I whispered. "You are just criminals, and you just gave me the hammer I need to smash your world into pieces." I started the truck. The engine roared to life, a low, angry growl that matched the feeling in my chest. I didn't drive toward the house. Not yet. I had the evidence. Now I needed to prepare the stage for the final act. Monday morning was 36 hours away, but I wasn't going to wait for Monday. I checked the shotgun in the rack behind my seat. It was unloaded in a case. I wasn't going to use it. I didn't need bullets. I had something much more powerful. I had the truth recorded in high-definition audio. I put the truck in gear. The hunt was over. It was time for the slaughter. Sunday morning broke with a sky so blue it felt like an insult. The world was waking up to church bells and lawnmowers, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting in a motel room preparing to destroy my family. I had barely slept. The adrenaline from the night before was still coursing through my veins, mixed with a caffeine jitters that made my hands shake until I clenched them into fists. I sat at the small table, my laptop open. The progress bar on the screen crawled forward. 98%. 99. Sent. The audio file was gone. It was in Sarah's inbox. The confession, the murder plot, the plan to abandon Leo. It was all there, wrapped in a digital package that would serve as the nail in their coffins. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah immediately. "Did you get it?" I asked, the second she answered. "Harry," she breathed. Her voice was trembling. "I just listened to the first 5 minutes." "My God, Harry. They actually said it. They admitted to cutting the brake lines." "Keep listening," I said, my voice flat. "It gets worse. They talk about the Cayman accounts. They talk about abandoning Leo at a military school." There was a silence on the line, then the sound of Sarah typing furiously. "I am calling the district attorney right now," she said, her voice shifting from shock to professional steel. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy to commit capital murder. We are going for the throat, Harry." "How long?" I asked. Sarah hesitated. "That is the problem. It is Sunday. The DA is at a golf tournament. The judge we need for the emergency warrant is out of town until noon. I can get the ball moving, but we need to coordinate with the sheriff's department. They need to set up a perimeter. They need to alert airport security because of the flight risk." "How long, Sarah?" I repeated. 4 hours, she said. "Maybe 5. We have to do this by the book, Harry. If we rush and mess up the warrant, a good lawyer could get the tape thrown out as inadmissible. We need to make sure it sticks." 5 hours. It was currently 9 in the morning. That meant the police wouldn't be ready to move until 2 in the afternoon. "The buyers are coming at 1, I said. "They are signing the papers at 1 o'clock. "Let them sign," Sarah said. "It doesn't matter. The sale will be voided once the arrests are made. The money will be frozen. Just sit tight, Harry. Do not go near that house. Let the police handle it." I hung up. Sit tight. Stay away. That was the logical advice. That was the safe advice. But Sarah wasn't listening to the wiretap. She didn't know what I knew. I put the headphones back on. The receiver was still picking up the signal from the living room. They were awake. I heard the clatter of dishes. I heard the hum of the vacuum cleaner. They were staging the house. They were erasing the last traces of my existence to make it look perfect for the cash buyer. Then my phone rang. The screen flashed a picture of Tiffany and Brian taken years ago when they were happy. It felt like a knife in the gut. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring. Then I answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice raspy and defeated. Dad, Tiffany's voice came through. It was sugary sweet, the voice she used when she wanted me to babysit or fix a leaky faucet. "Good morning." "Good morning, Tiffany," I said. "I was just calling to check in on you," she said. "We were worried. We haven't heard from you since yesterday. Did you find a place to stay?" "I found a place," I said. "It is small, but it is dry." "That is good," she said. "Listen, Dad. The buyers are coming early. They want to do a final walkthrough before we sign the papers at 1. I just wanted to make sure you were all done getting your things from the garage. I would hate for there to be any awkward run-ins. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried I would show up and spoil the illusion of the happy grieving widow selling her home. She wanted to make sure the coast was clear. "I am done," I lied. "I took what I needed." "Great," she said, the relief palpable in her voice. "That is really great. Look, once the sale is done and the dust settles, maybe we can have coffee. Before we go to Italy, I want you to say goodbye to Leo." The audacity took my breath away. She was offering me a crumb, a fake promise of a goodbye she never intended to let happen. She was going to dump my grandson at a boarding school and fly away without looking back. I gripped the phone tighter. "Don't worry about the goodbye, Tiffany," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the tremor of the old man. "Excuse me," she asked, the sweetness faltering. "I said don't worry," I repeated. "I will be there." "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "You said you were done." "I am done packing," I said, cold and hard, "but I am not done with you. I will be there this afternoon, Tiffany. I have a parting gift for you, something you earned." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, terrified silence. "Harry?" She warned, her voice dropping the mask entirely. "Do not come here. If you show up, I will have you arrested. I have the deed. This is my property." "Not for long," I said. I hung up the phone. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I tossed the phone onto the bed and immediately grabbed the surveillance headphones. I needed to hear the reaction. I needed to know what they were going to do. For a few seconds, there was silence in the headphones. Then I heard Tiffany scream, "Greg! Greg, get in here!" I heard heavy footsteps running across the hardwood floor. "What is it?" Greg asked. "What happened?" It was the old man, Tiffany hissed. Her voice was shaking with rage and fear. "He just called. He sounded different." "Different how?" Greg asked. "He didn't sound scared," she said. "He sounded calm. He said he was coming over. He said he had a parting gift." Greg laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "So what? Let him come. We will call the cops." "No, you idiot," she snapped. "He knows something." I could hear it in his voice. "He isn't just coming to beg, he is coming to make trouble. What if he talks to the buyers? What if he causes a scene?" "He won't get the chance," Greg said. His voice dropped low, lethal. I heard the sound of a drawer sliding open. It sounded like the heavy oak drawer in the sideboard where Brian used to keep the silverware. "I am not letting a senile old carpenter ruin a $4 million payday," Greg said. "Not when we are this close." "What are you doing?" Tiffany asked, her voice trembling. "Just insurance," Greg said. "I brought my piece from the car. If he shows up and tries anything, if he tries to step foot in this house before the papers are signed, I will handle it." "You can't shoot him," Tiffany whispered. "Not here. Not today." "I won't shoot him unless I have to," Greg said. "I will just scare him. But if he pushes me, well, we have dealt with problems before, haven't we?" I ripped the headphones off. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They weren't just going to call the police. Greg was armed. He had a gun. And he was waiting for me. I looked at the clock. 10:30. Sarah said the police needed 4 hours. That put them at the house by 2:30 or 3. The buyers were coming at 1. I said I would be there. If I waited for the police, the sale might go through. Greg and Tiffany might slip away with the cash deposit. Or worse, if they got spooked enough, they might grab Leo and run now. They might use him as a shield. I couldn't wait. I couldn't trust the timeline of the bureaucracy. I was the only one who knew the immediate danger. I reached under the bed and pulled out the long, hard case I had brought from the garage. I unzipped it. Inside lay my old Remington 870 shotgun. It was a hunting weapon used for ducks and deer back when Brian and I used to go upstate. I hadn't fired it in years, but I kept it clean. I kept it oiled. I picked it up. The steel was cold and heavy. It felt familiar. It felt like a tool. I wasn't a killer. I had seen enough death in Vietnam to last 10 lifetimes. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But Greg had a gun. He had killed my son, and he was standing in my house threatening to handle me. I reached into the side pocket of the bag and pulled out a box of shells. Birdshot. Not lethal at a distance, but terrifying. I wasn't going there to execute them. I was going there to hold the line. I was going there to make sure they didn't leave until the handcuffs were on their wrists. I began to load the shotgun. The sound of the shells sliding into the chamber was loud in the small room. Click, click, click. I pumped the action once. Chick, chick. The sound was final. It was the sound of a decision being made. I wasn't going to let them hurt Leo. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. I was going to walk through that front door, and I was going to look Greg in the eye, and I was going to see who flinched first. I grabbed the manila envelope with the evidence. I grabbed the digital recorder with the confession. I grabbed my phone. I walked out of the motel room into the bright, blinding sunlight. I threw the gear into the passenger seat of the truck. I checked my watch. 11 o'clock. I had 2 hours before the buyers arrived. But I wasn't going to wait for the buyers. I was going to crash their party early. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. "I am coming, Leo," I whispered. "Grandpa is coming." I pulled out of the lot, tires screeching on the pavement. I drove toward the suburbs, toward the house I built, toward the monsters who lived inside it. The police were coming, but they would be too late to save the day. That was my job, and I was going to finish it. I parked the truck at the end of the block for a moment, watching the house through the windshield. It looked perfect. The lawn was manicured, the windows sparkled, and a sleek black Mercedes was parked in the driveway next to Greg's sedan. The buyers were here. They were inside, probably sitting at my dining room table holding pens that would sign away my life. I checked the passenger seat. The large Bluetooth speaker was charged and paired to my phone. The digital recorder was in my pocket. The shotgun was in the footwell, hidden but within reach if things went completely sideways. But I wasn't planning on shooting my way in. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I was the one who brought the thunder. I shifted the truck into drive and floored the accelerator. The old V8 engine roared a sound like a waking dragon. I didn't aim for the driveway. I aimed for the decorative wrought iron gate that Greg had installed just 2 days ago to keep me out. The truck hit the metal with a deafening crash. The gate buckled and tore from its hinges, screeching across the pavement as I plowed over it. I slammed on the brakes, just inches from the front steps, the tires leaving thick, black skid marks on the pristine concrete. Inside the house, the noise must have sounded like a bomb going off. I grabbed the speaker and kicked the truck door open. I didn't run. I walked. I walked with the heavy, measured tread of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. I marched up the steps and kicked the front door open. The lockjam splintered. They had changed the locks, but they hadn't reinforced the frame. The scene inside was frozen in a tableau of shock. The real estate agent, a woman with stiff blonde hair, had jumped to her feet, clutching a folder to her chest. The buyers, a well-dressed couple in their 40s, were staring at me with mouths agape. Tiffany was half risen from her chair, her face a mask of pure terror. And Greg. Greg was standing by the fireplace. His hand had instantly flown to the small of his back, disappearing under his jacket. Harry, Tiffany screamed, her voice cracking. "You are crazy! Get out! Get out right now!" I didn't look at her. I looked at the buyers. "I apologize for the interruption, folks," I said. My voice calm, steady, and loud enough to fill the room. "I know you are in the middle of a transaction, but I think there is something you need to hear before you buy a house from a murderer." "Murderer," the buyer, husband stammered, looking from me to Tiffany. "What is going on here?" "He is senile," Tiffany shrieked, rushing toward the buyers. "Do not listen to him. He is confused. He has dementia. We were just about to call the home to come get him." I set the large speaker down on the coffee table right on top of the glossy real estate brochures. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Greg moved then. He stepped away from the fireplace, his eyes dark and lethal. He pulled a compact black pistol from his waistband. He didn't point it at me yet, but he held it at his side, hidden from the buyer's view by his body, but clear as day to me. "Put the phone away, Harry." Greg said, his voice low and trembling with adrenaline. "Walk out that door, and maybe you live to see tomorrow." The real estate agent saw the gun. She screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the tension. The buyers scrambled back, knocking over their chairs. "He has a gun," the wife yelled. "He has a gun." "Do not move," Greg roared, raising the weapon, now pointing it directly at my chest. "Everyone stay exactly where you are." Tiffany looked at him, horrified. "Greg, what are you doing? Put it away." "Shut up, Tiffany," Greg snapped, never taking his eyes off me. "He knows. Look at his face. He knows." I looked down the barrel of the gun. It was a 9mm. At this range, he couldn't miss. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I had faced worse than Greg in the jungle 50 years ago. I had faced men who fought for a cause. Greg was just a coward fighting for a payday. "You are right, Greg," I said, holding his gaze. "I do know. I know about the brake lines. I know about the bolt cutters. I know about Miller's Hill." His face went pale, the color draining away to leave him looking like a wax figure. The gun wavered slightly in his hand. "How?" he whispered. "Because you have a big mouth when you drink," I said. I raised my hand, my thumb hovering over the play button on my phone screen. "Don't do it." Greg warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I will drop you, Harry. I swear to God." "Go ahead," I challenged him. "Shoot me. But you can't shoot the cloud. This recording is already with the district attorney. It is with the police. It is everywhere. Killing me just adds a second life sentence to the one you already earned." He hesitated. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. He was trapped. He was a rat in a corner, and he knew it. Tiffany lunged at me, her fingernails clawing for the phone. "Give it to me," she screamed. I sidestepped her easily, and she crashed into the coffee table. "Now," I said. I pressed the button. Greg's voice boomed from the speaker, amplified and crystal clear, filling the room with the sound of his own guilt. I used the bolt cutters from the shop. I crimped it. Snapped right at the stress point. No brakes. 50 miles an hour. He didn't stand a chance. The silence in the room as the recording played was absolute, broken only by the damning voice of the man holding the gun. The buyers were huddled in the corner, holding each other. The agent was sobbing silently. Tiffany lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, her face blank with shock. And Greg looked like his soul had left his body. He lowered the gun slowly, the barrel pointing at the floor. He listened to himself describe how he murdered his best friend. When the recording finished, the silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. "You killed him," the buyer husband whispered. "You actually killed him." Greg looked up. His eyes were wild, desperate. He raised the gun again, aiming it at my head. His hand was shaking violently now. "Turn it off," he screamed, though the audio had already stopped. "Delete it. Tell them it is fake. Tell them you made it up." "It is over, Greg," I said softly. "Look out the window." He blinked, confused. "What?" "Listen," I said. Faintly in the distance, the sound of sirens began to rise. A low wail at first, then growing louder, closer, a chorus of justice coming down the street. Greg's eyes widened. He heard it. He looked at Tiffany, then at the door, then at me. "You old bastard," he hissed. "You ruined everything." He lunged. He didn't fire. He charged at me using the gun as a club, swinging it toward my temple with all his strength. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I had been waiting for this moment for 3 days. I dropped the phone and stepped into his swing, blocking his arm with my left forearm and driving my right fist into his solar plexus. It was a move I hadn't used in 40 years, but muscle memory is a powerful thing. Greg doubled over, gasping for air, the gun clattering to the hardwood floor. I kicked the weapon away, sending it skittering under the sofa. "It is over," I said, standing over him, as the sirens reached a crescendo outside and tires screeched in the driveway. The front door was kicked open, and the room was suddenly filled with men in tactical gear shouting commands. "Police! Drop it! Get down!" I raised my hands, a grim smile on my face. "Right here, officers," I said. "The trash is ready for collection." The chaos that erupted in my living room was deafening, a symphony of justice that I had orchestrated note by note. Men in tactical gear swarmed through the shattered front door, their boots heavy on the hardwood floors, their voices overlapping in a chorus of commands. "Move! Get down! Hands behind your back!" The air smelled of burnt gunpowder from the flashbangs that had gone off outside, or maybe it was just the electric scent of adrenaline spiking in the room. Greg was already on the floor, groaning, his face pressed into the expensive Persian rug he had probably planned to steal. A police officer had a knee in his back, cuffing his hands roughly. I watched as the arrogance finally drained out of him, replaced by the pathetic whimpering of a bully who had finally met someone bigger. He wasn't the tough guy who cut brake lines anymore. He was just a criminal caught in the light. The couple who had come to buy the house were huddled in the corner near the bookshelf, clutching each other. The husband looked like he was about to be sick, his face pale and slick with sweat. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, and then he looked at the speaker on the table, the black box that had just saved his life and his money. I gave him a small, grim nod. I had saved him from buying a murder house. He would thank me later once the shock wore off. But it wasn't over. Not yet. I turned my attention to Tiffany. She was standing near the kitchen archway, her back pressed against the wall, watching Greg being hauled to his feet. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for anything that could save her from the cage closing in. Then her eyes snapped upward, toward the ceiling, toward the second floor. "Leo." I saw the thought form in her mind as clearly as if she had screamed it. She needed leverage. She needed a shield. And the only thing she had left was my grandson. If she could get to him, if she could barricade herself in his room with him, she could turn this into a hostage situation. She could demand a car, a plane, a way out. She was desperate enough to do it. She was desperate enough to use an 8-year-old boy as a bargaining chip. She pushed off the wall, kicking off her high heels so she could run faster. She bolted toward the staircase, her movements jerky and frantic. My grandson. She shrugged, her voice cracking. "I need to get my son." She wasn't running to comfort him. She was running to use him. I was 70 years old. My knees were shot. My back was aching, and I was exhausted down to my marrow. But in that moment, I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I didn't think about the pain. I didn't think about the consequences. I just thought about Leo alone in his room, listening to the sirens and the screaming. I lunged forward, cutting across the living room. I reached the bottom of the stairs just as her foot hit the first step. I didn't grab her. I just stepped in front of her, planting my feet wide, gripping the banister with one hand and blocking the wall with the other. I became a wall of flannel and old muscle. "Move," she screamed, clawing at my chest. "Get out of my way, Harry. He is my son." I didn't budge. I looked down at her, at the mascara running down her cheeks, at the twisted mask of rage and fear that had replaced the beautiful face of the woman my son had married. "He is not your son," I said, my voice low and steady over the noise of the police clearing the room. A mother protects her child. A mother doesn't plan to abandon him in a military school so she can spend blood money in Italy. You lost the right to call him your son the moment you signed off on his father's murder. Get out of my way, she shrieked again, raising her hand to strike me. I caught her wrist in midair. My grip was iron. I squeezed just enough to let her know that the old carpenter still had strength in his hands. Don't you dare, I snarled, leaning into her face. Don't you dare touch him. Don't you dare go near him with those dirty hands. You are done, Tiffany. It is over. She stared at me, and for the first time I saw the realization hit her. She wasn't going to win. She couldn't charm her way out of this. She couldn't lie her way past me. I was the barrier she couldn't break. She slumped all the fight draining out of her legs, and she began to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. 2 officers were on her in seconds. They pulled her away from the stairs, spinning her around. Tiffany Sullivan. You are under arrest, one of them said, reciting the words that sounded like music to my ears. I watched them cuff her. I watched the metal click shut around her wrists, binding her to her fate. She looked back at me one last time as they dragged her toward the door. Her eyes were full of hate, full of venom, but I didn't care. Her hate couldn't hurt me anymore. I stepped aside to let them pass. I watched as Greg and Tiffany were marched out the front door, the very door they had locked me out of 3 days ago. I walked out onto the porch to see the end of it. The rain clouds had cleared, leaving a stark, bright afternoon sun that illuminated everything. The entire neighborhood was out. People stood on their lawns watching the spectacle. Mrs. Higgins from next door, the mailman, the kids down the street. They all watched as the black and white cruisers swallowed the people who had pretended to be their friends. Greg was shoved into the back of one car, his head pushed down by an officer to clear the doorframe. Tiffany was put in another. As the car doors slammed shut, a silence fell over the street. The sirens were cut, leaving only the crackle of police radios. A tall man in a suit walked up the driveway. It was the detective I had spoken to on the phone, the one Sarah had coordinated with. He looked at the broken gate, then at me. Mr. Sullivan, he said, extending a hand. I am Detective Miller. We got the recording. It is everything we needed. I shook his hand. It felt solid. Did you get them all, I asked. We picked up the notary an hour ago, Miller said. And we have a team raiding the shop where Greg used to work. We are going to find the bolt cutters. We are going to build a case so tight, they will never see the light of day again. Thank you, I said. You should go see your grandson, Miller said gently. The officers upstairs said he is asking for you. I nodded, feeling the tears finally start to prick at the corners of my eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaking and weak. But I had one more job to do. I walked back inside. The house was a mess. Muddy boot prints on the carpet furniture knocked over the shattered remains of my wife's vase still in the corner. But it felt different. The air felt lighter. The poison had been drawn out. I climbed the stairs, my legs heavy. I walked down the hallway to Leo's room. The door was closed. I knocked softly. Leo, I called. It is Grandpa. The door flew open. Leo was standing there, still wearing his pajamas, clutching the teddy bear I had rescued from the trash pile. His eyes were wide and red. Grandpa, he cried, throwing himself at me. I caught him dropping to my knees to wrap my arms around his small body. I held him tight, burying my face in his hair. He smelled like baby shampoo and innocence. He shook against me, sobbing into my shoulder. It is okay, buddy, I whispered, rocking him back and forth. It is okay. I am here. I am not going anywhere. Where are Mom and Greg? He asked, his voice muffled by my coat. The police took them. I pulled back so I could look at him. I wiped the tears from his cheeks with my rough thumbs. They had to go away for a while, Leo, I said, choosing my words carefully. They did some bad things. But you are safe now. You are safe with me. "Are you going to stay?" he asked, looking at me with a hope that broke my heart. "Mom said you went away. She said you weren't coming back." "She was wrong," I said firmly. "I am staying right here. We are going to fix this house up. We are going to make it ours again. Just you and me." He hugged me again, tighter this time. "I missed you, Grandpa." "I missed you too, kiddo," I said, tears streaming down my face, now unchecked and unashamed. I stood up, picking him up in my arms. He was getting too big to carry, but today I didn't care. I carried him down the stairs, stepping over the mess, walking out of the shadows of the past 3 days. We walked into the kitchen. I sat him down on the counter. "How about we make some grilled cheese?" I asked. "The way you like it, with the crusts cut off." He nodded, a small tentative smile breaking through the sadness. "Yeah," he said. I opened the fridge. It was full of expensive food Greg and Tiffany had bought for their party. Caviar, fancy cheeses, imported meats. I pushed it all aside and found the block of cheddar and the loaf of white bread in the back. I turned on the stove. The gas burner clicked and flared to life, a steady blue flame. I looked out the window at the driveway. The police cars were gone. The truck was parked on the lawn. The gate was broken. The house was a crime scene. But as the butter started to sizzle in the pan, and my grandson swung his legs against the cabinets, humming a quiet tune, I knew we were going to be okay. The war was over. We had won. And now we had the rest of our lives to rebuild what they had tried to destroy. 3 months have passed since the sirens faded from my driveway. Summer has finally arrived in Chicago, bringing with it the hum of cicadas and the heavy scent of blooming magnolias. The wrought iron gate that I smashed with my truck has been replaced. I welded the new one myself, making it stronger and taller than before. It is not there to keep people out anymore. It is there to keep what matters safe inside. The house feels different now. For weeks it smelled like bleach and bad memories. I scrubbed every inch of the floors. I repainted the walls. I threw out the furniture Tiffany had bought with the stolen money. I wanted to exorcise their ghosts from every corner. Now the house smells like fresh paint sawdust and the apple pie baking in the oven. It smells like a home again. The legal storm was intense but short. With the audio recording and the forensic evidence from the brake lines, there was no way out for them. The district attorney did not offer a plea deal. He went for the maximum. Last week, the gavel came down. Tiffany Sullivan and Gregory Vance were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder conspiracy and insurance fraud. I was there in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Tiffany looked at me one last time. Her eyes were empty. She didn't look like a monster anymore. She just looked like a pathetic, greedy woman who had gambled everything and lost. Greg didn't even look up. He stared at his hands, the hands that had cut the brake lines as the bailiffs led him away. They are gone. They are erased. They can never hurt us again. The insurance money came through a few days after the verdict. $2.5 million. It is a number that still feels unreal to a man who spent his life counting pennies for lumber and nails. I sat at the kitchen table with the check in my hand, thinking about the price of that paper. It cost my son's life. No amount of money can ever balance that ledger. But I knew I had to use it for something good. I had to turn this blood money into a seed for the future. I put the majority of it into a blind trust for Leo. It will pay for his education, his first home, his start in life. He will never have to worry about debt the way his father did. He will be free. But there was still a lot left over. I thought about what Brian would have wanted. He loved engines. He loved fixing things. He loved the feeling of grease on his hands and the satisfaction of a job well done. He always said that the world needs more people who know how to build, not just people who know how to talk. So yesterday, I walked into the local vocational college. I sat down with the dean and I wrote a check. We established the Brian Sullivan Memorial Scholarship. Every year, 10 kids from low-income families who want to learn mechanics, welding, or carpentry will get a full ride. Books, tools, tuition, everything paid for. I want to fill this town with young men and women who know the value of hard work. I want Brian's name to be spoken with respect, not pity. I want his legacy to be built on the things he loved, not the tragedy of his death. Today, though, I am not a millionaire trustee or a philanthropist. I am just a grandpa with a paint roller in his hand. We are in the upstairs bedroom. It used to be the guest room where Tiffany threw my clothes in trash bags. Before that, it was Brian's room when he was a boy. Now it is going to be Leo's playroom. We are painting it a bright, cheerful blue, the color of the sky over Lake Michigan on a clear day. Leo is standing on a step stool wearing one of my old t-shirts that hangs down to his knees. He is holding a small brush, carefully painting the trim around the window. He is concentrating so hard, his tongue is sticking out of the corner of his mouth. It is the same expression Brian used to make when he was learning to drive a nail. I stop painting for a moment and just watch him. He has been seeing a therapist, a nice lady named Dr. Evans. She says he is resilient. She says he is processing the trauma better than expected. But I see the shadows in his eyes sometimes. I see him looking out the window, waiting for a car that will never come. He dips his brush into the tray and looks at me. There is a smear of blue paint on his nose. "Grandpa," he asks, his voice small in the empty room. "Yeah, sport," I answer, wiping my hands on a rag. "Do you think Daddy is mad at Mommy?" he asks. The question hangs in the air, heavy and complicated. I put down my roller. I walk over to the stool and lift him down. I sit on the floor, leaning against the wall, and pull him onto my lap. I wrap my arms around him, resting my chin on the top of his head. "Why do you ask that, Leo?" "Because she did a bad thing," he says into my chest. "The police said she hurt him. Does that make him hate her?" I take a deep breath. I look at the blue walls, the color of hope. I think about Brian. He was soft-hearted. He was the kind of man who forgave debts, who gave second chances, who loved Tiffany even when she didn't deserve it. "Your daddy had a heart as big as the ocean, Leo," I say softly. "He was a forgiver. He loved people. He loved you and he loved your mom. If he were here, he would probably be sad, not mad. He would be sad that she lost her way." I pause, tightening my hug. "But I am different, Leo. I am not like your dad. I am a builder. And builders know that sometimes you have to tear down a rotten wall to save the house." I turn him so I can look into his eyes. They are Brian's eyes. "Your daddy was the heart of this family," I tell him. "But I am the shield. He is not mad because he is at peace. But I am the one who keeps the bad things away. And as long as I am breathing, nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Leo nods slowly. He seems to accept this. "Is it just us now, Grandpa?" he asks. I look around the room. I think about the empty chairs at the dining table. I think about the silence in the hallways. "Yeah, kiddo," I say. "It is just us. But we are pretty tough, aren't we?" He smiles a real smile this time. "Yeah, we are Sullivans." "That is right," I say, poking his blue nose. "We are Sullivans, and Sullivans don't quit." We go back to painting. We finish the trim as the sun starts to set, filling the room with golden light. We stand back and admire our work. It is not perfect. There are some drips, some uneven spots. But we did it together. Later that night, after Leo is asleep, I sit on the front porch in my rocking chair. The neighborhood is quiet. The stars are out. I have a cup of coffee in my hand, hot and black. I look at the driveway. There is no luxury sedan, no sports car, just my old truck, dented and reliable. I didn't want this fight. I didn't want to know the things I know. I would give every cent of that $2.5 million to have my son walk up that driveway one more time. But life doesn't give refunds. It only gives you what you build from the rubble. I took a broken house and made it a home again. I took a broken boy, and I am giving him a future. I sip my coffee. It tastes good. It tastes like victory. To anyone out there listening to my story, I want to tell you something. Do not underestimate the quiet ones. Do not mistake patience for weakness, and never ever come between a father and his family. They told me to pack my bags. They told me to get out. They thought I was finished. But I am still here. I am standing on my porch on my land, watching over my blood. The monsters are gone. The storm has passed, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation feels solid. If you have ever had to fight for what is yours, if you have ever had to stand up when everyone expected you to fall, share this story. Let the world know that justice isn't given. It is built brick by people who refuse to back down. This is Harry Sullivan signing off. Take care of your families and check your brakes. In my 70 years, I learned that the hardest wood to split is the family tree, but sometimes you have to prune the rotten branches to save the roots. Tiffany and Greg mistook my silence for surrender and my age for weakness. They forgot that a man who builds foundations also knows how to demolish them. True family is not defined by blood or marriage certificates. It is defined by loyalty, respect, and who stands beside you when the storm hits. I lost the son I raised, but I saved the grandson who needed me. Never let anyone take your dignity. If you believe justice was served today, please hit that like button to support this old man. If you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members, subscribe to the channel and share this story. Let the world know we do not back down. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven them? I read every single one.